It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search it out is the glory of kings. This is the Message to Kings podcast.
Episode 348, the Olivet Discourse, the Rapture. Matthew 24:29. Immediately after the tribulation, those days the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. Then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds and from one end of the heaven to the other. So this is our kind of third and final podcast on the Olivet Discourse. And most of this is going to be the rapture we're going to cover in this one. But I mean, just for reference, we've got the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and the sun will be darkened, and the Son of Man will appear in heaven. All of this, there's so many things going on here. The stars will fall from heaven. The moon will not give its light. That's the sixth seal. There'll be a great earthquake in the fourth trumpet, as well in one of the seals. The Son of Man will come on the clouds of heaven with power. That's Armageddon. But also it says with the trumpet, he'll gather his elect. That's the rapture. You see, we've got basically 3 verses in a 3.5-year time period in the scale of what we're looking at in the book of Revelation. So it just touches on everything, but it's almost in many ways as if it's written backwards, but it's not, because it's written to the Jews. So when Paul has many of his letters, they're written to Gentiles, saved Gentiles. Matthew writes to Jews, saved Jews, but it's also to Jews who may not be saved at the rapture. So there's a different order to things when you realize who it's written to and who it's not written to. And we got so many aspects of what's happening here. And not till we get to the book of Revelation when we really get into kind of an exhaustive approach of, the seals, the trumpets, all these judgments, Armageddon, which is the end, the rapture, 1,000-year millennial reign. That's not in here. But what I want to focus on today is he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to another. Now, one can interpret that as the end of the age and the judgment, but one could also see that as the rapture. And that's kind of what we'll cover today, because it's we'll almost look at it from a different perspective and give different theories. I'll give my approach as well, and I kind of covered in the previous one, just so you kind of understand my bent on how I read it and understand it. But I want everyone on this podcast who listens to hear multiple approaches, right? And then there's that question at the beginning of the Olivet Discourse. He says, "Now as he sat," this is Matthew 24:3. "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him and said privately, 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?'" He answers, "What will be the sign of your coming? The Son of Man will be on the clouds of heaven with great power and authority, and with the sound of a trumpet." but there's another when clause that Jesus enters into. And we'll do that, the parable of the fig tree, after we go over the basics of kind of opinions on what the rapture is really quick. Different opinions on the rapture. We've got amillennialism. Amillennialism basically says that it's all symbolic. And that's basically a symbolic meaning is all of the book of Revelation and all the judgment words are just symbolic. Others believe, I don't even know what you call it, that we are already in the book and the times of Revelation because the accumulation of those who died and such is a cumulative number, not an at time. In the book of Revelation, it'll say one of the seals is released and so much percent of man actually dies at that moment. Some say it's an accumulated number. I don't know the theory of that one, but some say we're living in that. And then it comes to the tribulation and the rapture. It's all dependent upon the timing of the rapture. There's pre-trib rapture, which before the tribulation, the rapture occurs. That is a growing popularity of people are headed towards the pre-rapture theory. Even symbolically, you can look back. Noah got out before the flood or with the flood. You've got Lot was called out at the time before the judgment and such. There's also symbolism that points to the opposite, but many have pointed to are leaning towards a pre-tribulation. If it's going to be that bad, the believers would get out first. But obviously there'll be believers after the rapture. So what happens to them? Those are all huge questions, probably for another time. There's a mid-trib, and there's a post-trib. Post-trib basically means the rapture will happen at the end. Believers will go through everything that all of the unbelievers go through, and they witness it all. There'll obviously be a great martyrdom during the book of Revelation because of the mark of the beast system that'll happen. Again, more to follow on that at a much later date. So you've got these different theories. There's also a multiple rapture theory. We do know there's at least two. People don't point to the second one, but there are two witnesses that are resurrected, and they get raptured up. The word rapture comes from the word harpazo, which means to be carried up, to be taken or snatched away. So why I lean towards pre-trib? Well, it seems very practical for God to get out his people for the chaos and the judgment of the world to occur. But there's probably a more reasonable reason, in my opinion, is that, and it's just a theory, right? I'm not right, I'm not wrong, and I'm not going to argue with anyone over it because it's not a foundational issue. It's just not. Does it kind of skew some of your thinking? Saying that God is all about trials and hardships. That was my only negative if someone's post-trib is that they always down because God always makes them go through everything. That shouldn't be the mindset. If you're post-trib and you don't have the mindset, that's great. But pre-trib, my thought is that God would get us out, but it's almost as if the horrible things of Revelation cannot happen until the Holy Spirit in 1 billion believers leaves the planet. So there's a snatching away, a lifting up. The great restrainer leaves and evil reigns. Then chaos ensues. Are there seals in heaven that allow the chaos to ensue? Yes. But could it happen with all those believers on the planet who pray? I don't know. I'm not sure. But will they be believers after the rapture? Yes. There are contradictory scriptures, but it's clear that while hearts will be hardened in some cases, there's also like a messianic revival. There's 144,000 Jewish believers that come on the scene, and they are evangelists on the earth. And evangelists don't preach and not get people saved. So there'll be millions, if not billions. I've heard it said there may be the greatest harvest of souls in world history actually happens after the rapture. And that's a fascinating thought. It's like there's a falling away and a harvest at the same time. It's a good way to put it, because there shouldn't be lukewarm people on the planet. Either you love Jesus or you don't. And that's kind of what I believe is going to be a rapid race to the end of harvesting and salvations and wickedness. A great separation is going to occur up to the end, and even after the end, after the rapture, at extents and levels we can't even imagine. It's almost terrifying to try to imagine some of these scenes that you read about. Read it for yourself. Read about the seals and what happens. It is absolutely terrifying. Though the imagery, like the white horse, is symbolic, it still says that there'll be great chaos and confusion and death that happens because of these things. While the white horse is symbolic of someone, the actions and the results are not. That's not how we see it. So, because the white horse, you're not going to get the name of the white horse and who he represents, but you have to understand he's a conqueror and such. So, um, little tidbit there on how to read Revelation. All right, so let's keep going. Matthew 24:32. Now learn this parable for the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and put forth leaves, you know the summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. So if you've read that, you could have read it 5 different times, but if you miss one word, you miss what's out of place. It's like those kid games where what word or what picture is not fit in this equation, and it's the word generation. Why are we talking about generations? This is the fig tree. The fig tree is near. You know what's going on when it has its, a certain characteristic. When you see that they become tender and put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So you have the season when the fig bears fruit again. Basically, the season is at hand. And then it says, "I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place." Well, why are we talking about generations, right? The fig tree has all through Scripture represented Israel. And it was Jesus who cursed that fig tree before, right? So in 70 AD, that curse will come to reality, and the Jewish temple complex and nation will be destroyed by the Romans. But now he's saying this fig tree is going to come back to life. I've heard it said by Chuck Missler and other teachers that this clearly represents. So when Israel became a nation after World War II, the olive tree came back to life, right? So now, if we put it in that context, what does the next sentence say? Surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. I have heard it interpreted, if you want to, Well, what do you do? What's the maximum a person can live, according to the Bible? 120 years. When did Israel become a nation again? When it start to bear fruit? When did that olive tree come back to life? May 14th, 1948. Israel became a nation again. If this interpretation is true, we just might see the rapture in our timeline. Isn't that interesting? So why do prophecy teachers and revelation students keep an eye on Israel? Obviously, it's still God's chosen. He chose them first, right? He revealed the covenant of God through them, um, and he still loves Israel. And the promise of God is still on Israel. It didn't shift. The promise of Abraham, it's still there. But when it comes to prophecy, Israel, if you were to imagine a clock, Israel is the hour hand, Jerusalem is the minute hand, and the Temple Mount is the second hand. We know Israel is now a nation. Jerusalem is now the capital of Israel. And the second hand, well, you can't desecrate a temple that doesn't exist. That has to change. And when that changes, the season's not just at hand. We're seconds from the end when there's a temple. Now, will there be some errant missile that destroys the Alaska Moss that's there at the Temple Mount one day? Or will there be will they realize, and I've heard before, that it actually could be built right next door to it? And because that's where it was. I don't know what's true. I know that they're gathering together and trying to find the red heifer and all these other things to make sure they're ready for the day they rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. That's the second hand, and that's how close we are. So, though no man knows the day or the hour, there are a lot of indicators. There's a lot going on. Who would have ever, if you went back centuries ago, and all those prophecies about Israel becoming a nation again and all those things, people said they were symbolic and such, but it wasn't until after World War II that Israel actually becomes a nation again. And the miracle of it becoming a nation is an entire podcast on its own, podcast series. I don't know if anyone's done it yet, but Matthew 24:36. But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them away. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two men will be in one field, one will be taken and the other one left. Two women will be grinding in the mill, one will be taken, the other left. Watch therefore that you do not know what hour your Father is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allow his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So, just for the listener's sake, if anyone tells you the rapture is going to be on November 13th, 2026, they don't know this Matthew 24:36, right? So, not to say disavow the person or anything, but though they're studying the Bible, they don't know this date, right? Or they had a revelation from God that there'll be a rapture on this date. Well, that's actually contrary, because no one knows, even the angels of heaven, and only the Father. So, be very, very careful when you hear that. Any good student would not make that type of assumption. Also, prophecy and dates, they don't work. You know, if you heard from God's voice and you hear these things and he says something will happen in 3 months, you don't even know the start date. Didn't mean now. It could be 3 months from, the Feast of Trumpets or something like that. And there's always, you never know when and you never know how. And we do see in part and know in part, but we never know when or how. And that's the Father's good pleasure to know the when and the how. So just be careful with that when you kind of study into Revelation. Here's a freaky one. It says in Matthew 24:37, but as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. Now, Jesus goes on to say it's more about the surprise that it comes out of nowhere. Other prophecy teachers have gone down the road of speaking of what else was it like in the days of Noah? Well, there was Nephilim in the land, there was giants, and there was horrible violence. Well, is that coming again? I don't know, but it's a little terrifying. And when you consider all the crazy stuff with biological medicine, chemical warfare, all the crazy things that are available and out there for wicked people to use, it is a little terrifying. And there's obviously atomic weapons too, but that's different than this Noah comment. But the weapons of warfare in today's modern world are terrifying. There's all these things to think about when you kind of go down this road. But the Noah one is a really crazy thought of all of the wickedness and nastiness that could come about at the end. It mentions one person will be working in the field and the other will be grinding. Another version says one will be in bed, another one will be taken and one's in bed and one's not. Well, that's interesting because it actually in the Bible kind of projected and speaks of what we didn't know back then was that there was different time zones. Isn't that interesting? One working, one sleeping. So. And to conclude the Olivet Discourse, I'll cover some of the parables that Jesus covered later, but this will be the last kind of run on this Olivet Discourse. And I'm not going to explain the judgment coming up here, except he will judge people and nations. And there'll be a resurrection of the dead, and there will be judgment, and the devil will be thrown in the lake of fire. And I'll just end with this. Matthew 24:31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on the right hand and the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his far right, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry, and feed you, or thirsty, and give you drink? When did you see a stranger, and take you in, or naked, and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick, or in prison, and came to you? And the king will answer and say to them, Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did to one of the least of these of my brethren, you did it to me. Then he will say to those on his left, Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they also will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, Surely I say to you, inasmuch as you did to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Message to Kings. Feel free to check out the website, messagetokings.com, or if you want to chat, email us at messagetokings@gmail.com.